This is The Ridge on Air.
Welcome to The Ridge on Air. I'm your host, Boo Prince, and today's episode is the penultimate episode for the crazy year of 2020. And I've got to tell you that if you've been feeling like this year just cannot end soon enough, you might be suffering from a spot of burnout. And that's something that we are going to be talking about on the show today. Mandy Herold is going to be joining us to discuss parental burnout. It's not something that gets talked about a lot, but it is a very, very real condition. And she has some really helpful strategies to help you get through parental burnout and how to manage it. We are also going to be checking in with our beautiful boys, hearing their voices, some of the things that they want to share with us about how their 2020 has gone and some of the things that they're looking forward to for next year. Then we're going to be hearing from Felix Jackson, who is singing Electricity by Elton John, that of course from the musical Billy Elliot. And finally, we're going to be checking in with Nick Deanna, who is, of course, Deputy Head Academics at the Ridge School. And he's going to be reflecting on some of the experiences of 2020 and how lockdown and online learning really influenced his thinking around what is important in how our children learn. It's a cracking show. Stay with us.
You're listening to The Ridge on Air.
Welcome back. So I'm delighted today to have Mandy Herold back in the studio with us. And Mandy, we're going to be talking about parental burnout, which I've got to tell you is an issue actually very, very close to my heart. And I just think back to when I was a very new mum. My first son was like 6 months old, and I have this incredibly clear vision of getting up at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning and going and sitting next to that cot with this little baby crying there. And I just sat there and I wept and wept and wept. And I remember thinking to myself, I am so tired. I have no brain left. How do people do this? Am I abnormal? You know, just all those feelings, which I now know actually every parent feels at some point or another, that helplessness and just that sense of, am I ever going to get a break? Now, you and Jan Mallon, the wonderful Jan Mallon, did a fabulous webinar on parental burnout just in the last week. And I understand that you addressed so many of these issues. You had a huge response from parents. So congratulations on that. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Boo. It's so lovely to be with you.
So, Mans, why don't we start by talking a little bit about what burnout actually is?
So there are three components to burnout, Boo. There is emotional exhaustion, which is the one that I really want to focus on. So that's the fatigue that comes from caring too much for too long. The second thing is depersonalization, so the depletion of empathy, caring, and compassion. And then the third component is a decreased sense of accomplishment, so like an unconquerable sense of futility, feeling that nothing you do makes any difference. And yeah, so I'd love to talk a little bit more about burnout, and particularly as it applies to parental burnout.
And you know, Mans, I think that there is also something of a social stigma around this term, you know, parental burnout, because there's kind of almost that sense of like, well, everyone's a parent, like we've been doing this forever, people have managed for millennia, so what's wrong with me? And am I allowed to say I can't do this anymore or I need a timeout?
Oh, Boo, this is really very close to my heart, because I don't think that we are having brave enough conversations about how hard this parenting is and how relentless it is. You know, when you go and do a job, you can come home. I mean, to a lesser extent than we've been in lockdown, because our homes have been our places of work and of our personal space. But I just think that both explicitly and implicitly, that we are given this message that parenting is so rewarding and fulfilling, and that with one wonderful smile from our beloved child, we'll be instantly fulfilled. And it's a myth. It's just untrue, and it can actually be really, really hurtful and harmful. And I think that we need to be having more honest conversations about burnout and what it looks like and feels like.
So, Mans, I mean, there've got to be strategies for dealing with these things as well, right? And I do want us to get into that. But for somebody who is listening to this right now and thinking, oh my goodness, I'm recognizing myself in this moment right now, what do you want to say to them?
So I want to say, Boo, that I think we need to identify the difference between the stress and the stressor. So the stressor are the things that activate the stress response in our bodies. So it can be anything that we hear, smell, touch, taste, or imagine that can do harm. So they're external stressors and then internal stressors. So external stressors can be things like work, money, family, time, cultural norms and expectations, or even experiences of discrimination. Mm-hmm. And then the internal stressors, so the less tangible things could be things like self-criticism, body image, identity, memories, or even what's going to happen in the future. I mean, I think that we have been in an incredibly stressful 7-8 months, and I think with no kind of end in sight of when COVID may be a thing of the past. I think there have been a lot of stressors that have then triggered the stress. And the stress that's important for me to clarify, Boo, is that the stress is the neurological and physiological shift that happens in our body when we encounter one of these stressors. And that it's something that we are not, it's not an intellectual response, it's a physiological response.
Now, you know something, it's so interesting that you say that, because, so, I mean, I have a fridge magnet of all things, of all the kind of trivial things in the world that says, and I keep it because it's a little reminder, it says there, I have had more trouble with myself than anyone else I have ever met. Mm-hmm. And every time I see that fridge magnet, it kind of reminds me to stop and breathe and remember to be a little bit kind to myself, because actually I'm the only horse I have in this race. Mm-hmm. So if I'm not backing me and trying to look after myself, how can I look after anyone else?
100%. And Boo, that is one of the most important things about conscious discipline that I'm so passionate about is adult first. Right. Adult first, child second. And so I love your fridge magnets. I must perhaps get myself one of those.
And also the other thing, Mans, is when we talk about adult first, what we need to remember is that we're in a leadership role in our families. And if we are just allowing ourselves to reach a point of burnout without actually being kind to ourselves and taking care and giving ourselves the opportunity to recover from these situations, that's actually what we're modeling for our kids, isn't it?
100%. And sort of giving them the message that it's okay just to be in survival and it's not okay.
And that it's normal.
Absolutely.
Email us at onair@ridgeschool.co.za.
Well, we're going to get back to that conversation with Mandy Herold in just a moment when she shares some strategies for dealing with parental burnout. But in the meantime, we have some beautiful voice notes from our wonderful, wonderful Ridge boys. And we're going to check in with them and hear about some of the things that they really enjoyed during 2020. These voice notes come to us from Ehu Uruesi, Zachary Pretorius, Guy Rothman, Jonathan Schwegman, Finn Shuttleworth, Junior Mosupa, Raf Pereira, Sam Bemelman, Boto Swazi, and Zaydan Mula.
The most important thing I learned this year was my English and my maths. Practicing my English helped me with my creative writing, and practicing my calculations helped me understand more about math and HTU sums.
The most important thing I learned this year is the importance of giving at any time, especially when things are bad, like COVID-19, when people needed it the most.
My favorite thing about this year was the online Founders Day, because I could see my friends online and there was a DJ and we could dance.
I think the best thing about 2020 was I got to spend more time with my family and there was a lot of time to relax.
My best thing about 2020 is being with my friends and my teacher.
What was the best thing of 2020? Finally getting to go to hot lunch before coronavirus.
Making new friends.
Nice because there's not a lot of work to do. It has been playing with my friends and working with Miss Pucas.
I learned about technology. When I was at school, on homeschool, I learned to work at home, had some breaks, and speak to my friends and my iPad, and also teaching my friends and do some assemblies on my iPad, and it was the best thing ever.
What I love most about 2020 was the remote learning, because I could learn in my PJs, and I loved being able to snack at any time with my camera off, and my teachers wouldn't know.
You know, we just love receiving these voice notes from the boys, and I can't wait in a couple of years' time for these lads to hear these voice notes again and reflect on how much they have grown up. They're so incredibly sweet.
Whether you need an early morning kickstart or an afternoon pick-me-up, the Snazzy Max has got you covered. Pick up a delicious creamy cappuccino, a cool fruit smoothie, or even just a refreshing cup of tea. The Snazzy Max is now conveniently located in a trailer outside the main school gates on Worston Road. The Snazzy Max at the Ridge, where the coffee is tops and the smiles are free.
This is the Ridge OnAir.
Now, if you've been following our conversation with Mandy Herald on parental burnout, we're going to jump back into that now and talk about some of the strategies that we can use to deal with it.
I'd love to talk just briefly, Boo, about this analogy of a tunnel.
Go for it.
And how emotions, which live in our body, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when I was talking about those three components of burnout, that emotional exhaustion, burnout happens when we get stuck in the middle of this tunnel. And what I'd love to talk to you about are these 7 strategies for completing the stress response cycle.
Now, when you talk about completing the stress response cycle, you've already mentioned that the stress that we feel is physical and not just psychological. So let's speak to us about that a little bit.
So the most important and the most amazing, effective way to deal with the stress response cycle is through physical activity.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. So it may be running, walking, swimming, dancing, moving your body. I was driving to the studio this morning and the gentleman in front of me in his car was actually dancing at the traffic light, and I thought, he's moving his body.
Absolutely.
He's finishing his stress response cycle. And I think we go, okay, well, maybe this is something I need to do twice a week.
Yeah.
But actually, when we think about it, Boo, and when we're honest with ourselves, stress is something we experience on a daily basis.
Yes.
So being able to prioritize some kind of physical activity every day is imperative for our survival, in the same way as eating and sleeping is.
What else can we do?
So, Boo, maybe I can just pause here and just say that I've done a lot of research on this subject.
Yes.
And I listened to a podcast with Brené Brown and these sisters, Emily and Amelia Nagowski, and they have written a book called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Response Cycle. And I think that it has really changed the way that I view this, because they say that your body doesn't understand when you've finished a project or when you've met a work deadline. So in other words, those stressors.
Yes.
And for us at the moment, it's November, so all our staff, the teachers, are writing reports. Our body doesn't understand meeting that deadline or handing in those reports, because like my son Ryan is about to write exams, his body doesn't understand when that exam is finished, because his body is still just drowned and soaked in these stress juices.
Right.
So it's important that we speak body language. So physical activity is what tells your brain you've successfully survived this threat and that now your body is a safe place to live.
So that's number one.
That's number one. Second one is breathing.
Oh, this is a favorite.
Now, I'm not talking about breathing as in when your shoulders lift up and down, because that's often when you say take a deep breath, the boys, they lift up their... But I'd like us to take, you and me, right now, and whoever's listening to this right now, to just take 3 deep breaths. So we're going to inhale for 5, we're going to hold for 5, exhale for 10, because it's long. It's important that your exhalation is longer than the inhalation, and then hold for 5. So let's do that together. Let's breathe in, hold, breathe out, and hold. And Boo, I'm so passionate about this as a skill for our little people and for us as parents. Some of the feedback actually that Jan and I got after the talk that we did was a mum said, I'm very good at exercising, but I forget to breathe.
And I totally understand that.
And I'm a breath holder myself. So when I'm in survival and when I'm triggered, I forget to breathe. And I think that helping our children understand the importance of these deep belly breaths. Because what happens when we take a deep belly breath, that diaphragm moves up and down, massages our internal organs. It stimulates our prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking part of our brain. And it helps to tell our bodies, I'm safe. So taking 3 deep breaths wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I think is such an important life skill for our children.
What's number 3?
3, positive social interaction.
Okay, so this one I really, really love, because I think people often think, that social interaction is like you have to go for a long boozy lunch or something. And that is totally not the case. I mean, it can literally be like saying hello to, your favorite newspaper vendor as you're driving down the road or something. I mean, it's about that human connection, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Brief moments.
And now more than ever, Boo, we all in behind these masks and just stopping at the cashier, or if you're getting a coffee, just to say thank you, or that is a beautiful blouse you're wearing, or
it's the little things. Literally.
Absolutely. And this again just reassures your brain that the world is a safe and sane place, and that not all people suck.
And it also stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is incredibly important for getting you out of that kind of fight or flight state.
100%. Just by smiling, just the
hello.
muscles, I'm smiling at you now, just the muscles that you use in your face to smile help to cut off that fight-flight response as well.
Beautiful.
Number 4, laughter.
Oh, yes.
Laughing together. Even just reminiscing about times that you've had a good laugh about something increases that relationship satisfaction. And I was thinking about Michael McIntyre as a comedian, and just even if it's one of his clips that I've heard before, I just know that I'm just going to experience this big belly, impolite, sort of snorting, helpless laughter. And that's another way to complete that stress response cycle.
It is so, so, so important. Laughter is hugely important. And number 5 is?
Affection.
All kinds of affection.
All kinds of affection, not just physical affection, although physical affection is great. These authors talk about a 20-second hug, standing over your own center of balance to support your own weight. This can change your hormones, it can lower your blood pressure and your heart rate, and improve your mood. And we know that oxytocin is the bonding molecule, and studies show that by having a 20-second hug, there's a definite shift in our bodies, and it helps us to complete the cycle.
And by the way, if a hug from your dog or your cat is perfectly valid, right?
100%. Pets are amazing. It doesn't just stop with human beings.
That's for sure. Number 6.
A big old cry.
Hallelujah.
A big old cry. Again, remembering that this isn't about dealing with a stressor. So I dropped Ryan off back at school last night, and I got home, and he's about to start exams, and I was feeling really overwhelmed. And then we got a message on their house WhatsApp group that one of the moms had prepared these little care packages to say good luck to the boys. And I just burst into tears, and it was just, I couldn't really rationalize it, because again, it's not an intellectual thing. It was just an overwhelming outpouring of just emotion, and I felt so much better afterwards. And that didn't mean to say that that the exams have been taken away, or that I dealt with the stress, or perhaps that I'm looking at. It's about just having that release in your body physiologically.
Okay, so I mean, I'm a huge fan of a big old cry, no question about it. What's number 7?
7, the last one that we're going to talk about is creative expression. So engaging in a creative expression today leads to more energy, excitement, and enthusiasm tomorrow.
So, Mans, these 7, I'm just going to run through them again. Number 1 is physical activity, maybe even just a walk around the block. Number 2, breathing, that deep, slow breathing. Number 3, positive social interaction. Number 4, having a good old laugh, and dirty jokes are allowed. Number 5, affection is deeply, deeply important. Number 6, a big old cry. And number 7, creative expression. Does singing in the shower count?
100%.
Okay,
Absolutely.
or bad drawing, or going to a mosaic class.
Crocheting.
Yes, absolutely.
Listening to music.
I often say I crochet so that I don't stab people. And it's perfectly valid. It is. It's wonderful.
Boo, something that I think is really, really important is that the stress is not the problem.
Yes. Stress is part of life.
Exactly. So the problem is that the strategies that deal with the stressors have almost no relationship to the strategies that deal with the physiological reaction our bodies have to the stressor. And to be well is not to live in a state of perpetual safety and calm, but to move fluidly from a state of adversity, risk, adventure, excitement back to safety and calm and out again. And wellness happens in our bodies when our bodies are a place of safety.
So, Mans, let's just touch for a moment on wellness in general, because we know that stress is a natural part of life. Nobody goes through life without stress. And if we try to eliminate all forms of stress from our lives, we'll more or less be dead, right?
Absolutely.
So stress is not the problem. It's actually how we proactively seek to move through the stress, let go of those physiological sort of chains of stress, which keep us in that state of fight or flight and keep our bodies bathed in stress hormones.
And Boo, I just think that the world has turned wellness into yet another goal that everyone should strive for. And that's nonsense. Wellness is the freedom to move fluidly through the cycles of being human.
Yeah.
And wellness is the authors of this book, The Burnout, they say that wellness is not a state of being, it's a state of action. And just maybe the last thing that I'd love to say is that we're not supposed to do this on our own.
No.
And just putting up your hand and saying, I'm not coping, that is teaching your child that they don't have to be perfect all the time as well. To be able to say, I need help, whether it be with a lift club or with a lunchbox or dressing up for something that you just don't have.
It's not your zone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Being able to say it takes a village to raise a child, and who is in your tribe, and finding something that works for you. Because for me, exercise is not my thing.
Me either.
and there are other things that we can do to complete the stress response cycle.
So, Mandy, I think that's such a beautiful comment on reaching out to one's village. And the Ridge is such an extraordinary village and has so many incredible villagers who are willing and able and experienced in helping parents to get through this burnout cycle. And you are one of our top candidates there. So I know that you're always very, very willing and keen to hear from parents who do feel that they're battling in this area.
Absolutely.
So I want to give out your email address, mherald@ridgeschool.co.za. And you can feel free to reach out to Mandy and schedule a time to speak with her.
Absolutely, Boo. And I think just through the talks that we've done, and I ran a parenting series in September, I think the biggest takeaway is just that we're not alone.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Mandy Herald, our junior prep principal. And if you would like to get hold of her, you can do so on her email address, mherald@ridgeschool.co.za. Mandy runs several parenting workshops and webinars, so do look out on the school app for when those are happening and feel free to join in.
The Ridge on Air.
It's like that there's a music playing in your ear, and I'm listening, and then I disappear, and then I feel it move me like a burning deep inside. Sometimes
might have been impossible to hide, and suddenly I'm flying like a bird, like electricity sparks inside of me, and I'm free, electricity sparks inside of me, and I'm free, I'm free. Ooh, I'm free.
Music at the Ridge.
Isn't that absolutely fabulous? The very, very talented Ridge boy, Felix Jackson, singing Electricity by Elton John, and that is from the musical Billy Elliot. We're going to pick up now with our voice notes from our lovely Ridge boys. And just to say that if you have sent us a voice note and it has not been featured on today's episode, do check out the last episode for 2020, which will be coming out in about 10 days' time. That's on the last day of school. In the meantime, these voice notes come to us from Jude Pretorius, Sianda Ngobo, Ehu Uruesi, Raf Pereira, Finn Shuttleworth, and Adam Ball.
I'm most looking forward to all the new adventures I'll have as a grade 7, and especially being a leader in the school.
I'm excited to make new friends, especially if new boys start at the Ridge.
I think I'm going to look forward to seeing new faces and new teachers.
Making new friends, and also playing in the sandpit again. I really miss doing that. It's my favorite thing to do at break.
I'm looking forward to seeing my new teacher and seeing my new classroom.
I'm looking forward to going into grade 7 because as a grade we'll finally be the leaders of the Ridge School. I also look forward to influencing the younger grades in a positive way, and especially for the sport and getting back onto the field in 2021.
Hilton College head boy Shumela Noche shares his thoughts on how the school has inspired him.
The Hilton experience is difficult to define, but two words come to mind. Firstly, excellence. For we achieve excellence in our academics, sports, culture, but most importantly, excellence in our character. Secondly, it's brotherhood. For here at Hilton, you will always find acceptance. Hilton is a truly special place, and I hope that one day you boys have the pleasure of donning the black and white.
For more information, visit hiltoncollege.com.
You're listening to The Ridge on Air.
Nick Diana is the Deputy Head Academics at the Ridge School, and he recently wrote a fabulous article for the Independent Schools magazine, and it's all about the Ridge School's response to the crisis of 2020 and some of the lessons which came out of that. And I'm delighted to welcome Nick onto the podcast today. So Nick, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Boo, for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Nick, I wanted to touch on a few ideas that you presented in the article, which I thought was so interesting, because particularly in your role as head of academics, you mentioned how you had really kind of gained some new insights through the process of trying to sort of establish online learning and that kind of stuff. And I don't really want to dwell on online learning, but really to kind of mine some of those insights which have informed your thinking about approaching academics and the whole sort of idea of less is more that kind of came out of this massive experiment that we all went through this year. Can you give us a little bit of insight about that?
Sure. I mean, we are as you know, a standalone prep school, and we run from grade 0 to 7. And we realized, having moved into lockdown, which came at us very, very quickly, what needed to be done in order to ascertain the boys and making sure the boys were actually all catered for. And that's not just the academics, that's just emotional and the social at the same time. So as we moved to online and as we started to progress with the online learning and the teaching, we started to realize that the more content we gave to the boys, the less would would come back to us because of the platform it was on. So we took a stance as a team, having had a week's break in April, to actually put together quite a cohesive, I suppose, curriculum in a way, so that the boys were able to apply skills rather than too much content. I think what we miss here is that social interaction, where you're able to explain it really proficiently in a classroom environment using physical apparatus. So something that's really concrete. And I can relate to my grade 7 maths class teaching fractions. I love to use things that are concrete, because moving from fractions to decimals to percentages is quite an abstract concept. And so if you think about how difficult that was for a grade 7 boy to adjust to, as well as an educator, I mean, I think it was even more difficult with the younger grades at the same time. So we actually decided that let's not overload the boys with content that we didn't feel was necessary to cover, but rather with the most important aspects of the curriculum within those few weeks.
So what's so interesting to me about this, Nick, is that, you know, in our previous podcast episode, we spoke to education specialist Neil Butcher, who really touched on precisely this issue, that the idea that really just pushing content, particularly in a world where, you know, the amount of content that we can actually teach in a day is actually a diminishing percentage of the amount of content that is continuously being created in the world every day. And, you know, which means you're never going to catch up. But rather looking at who we are as human beings and how we apply our social and emotional skills to the learning process, as opposed to focusing purely on the content. And what I found so interesting about that kind of social emotional adaptation in your article was the comment around how differently the children adapted to how slowly the adults adapted, right? The children, it was far less of an issue for the children. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So what we found is that in terms of what we had to do is that we had to change our approach academically. It wasn't about forcing the content anymore. It was about making sure that the boys understood what the content and the skills were about. So the online interactions were key for us in terms of actually getting across what needed to be done. So we re-looked at a whole lot of our educational viewpoints. We started looking at assessment, the family dynamics, the home environment, and how we interacted with the boys mattered a whole lot more than just the dissemination of the content. I'm going to go to our mantra where boys are known and grown. And we felt that if we're assessing our boys who are writing a paper on the other end of the spectrum, we weren't necessarily assessing the skills of the content. We were actually assessing the home base, which was entirely unfair because of the different environments that all the boys actually come from. So we decided that we had to change our teaching methodology and our practice. And that was reflected in our reports at the same time.
So, Nick, I thought that was a fascinating comment as well. And of course, all the parents in the school noticed the change in the format of reports. And I thought it was so smart because I'm sure that everyone else, just like me, also felt like, oh my goodness, I'm not a teacher. How am I going to be assessed, right? Like, how is my kid going to be assessed as a result of my teaching ability, which obviously, as you're saying, is completely unfair.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think I did say it in the article too, that, you know, we're a school that is 101 years old. We've been entrenched with 100 odd years of tradition that hasn't changed much. And what COVID did is it brought about change at a rapid pace, which was exciting at the same time. So these reports that were sent out, it was a holistic overview of the boy himself, rather than just assuming that my son is a 67%er. And that, for me, speaks so much more about the all-round overview and comprehensive overview of every boy in the school, rather than just assigning a symbol. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think the symbols that they need to come, because at the end of the 12 years of schooling, there is a matric paper to write. But I think what we need to understand now is that we are a prep school, and we are preparing boys for life, not just for a symbol on a report card.
I think that is such a profound statement, because indeed we are preparing them for life. And on that note, Nick, my final question to you is, how do you feel that you personally have grown in your role through this year and through all these changes? Because obviously, your role has been deeply impacted in how do we deliver an academic as well as a social and emotional education to these children. How do you see that you have grown and changed?
Sure, it's a tough one. I've had to grow a bit of a thick skin because of the changes and the calls which have had to be made. We have to move with the times. We have to move with the changes. Otherwise, we're going to fall behind. But for me, in a personal capacity, I feel that we're on the right track in terms of what education should look like, especially for a standalone all-boys school, where, and I know I've said it earlier, that we need to sort of adapt and change and transform and reform, because every day is different in the school environment, and that's what makes it so exciting. I've learned that over the 11 years that I've been here, that not every day is the same, and that's what makes it so exciting to come to school, and that we need to be cutting edge, and we need to be at the forefront of what makes the boys actually tick. If they're having fun and they're enjoying themselves and they're happy individuals, what more could we ask for? Because I think the rest will come. It's not just a focus on the academics or the sport or the music. That's a mixture of what the Ridge School is about, and we've grown to learn that over the years.
What an absolutely beautiful comment. Nick, Deanna, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate those insights, and I hope that we will have you on the podcast again for some more valuable insights. Thank you for your time.
Boo, thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
This is The Ridge on Air.
Well, that's it for this episode of The Ridge on Air. Thank you for being with us. And if you have any comments or suggestions, or perhaps something that you would like us to cover on the show, please get hold of us at this email address, onair@ridgeschool.co.za. We'd love to hear from you. And our final episode for the year will be coming out on the last day of school. Don't miss it. Catch you then.
My comment is, I love the Ridge. There's good people with good hearts and great teachers.
You're listening to The Ridge on Air.
The Ridge on Air is brought to you by Prince Media, voiceover, media coaching, and podcast services. Visit princemedia.co.za for more.